We had a very good speech by President Tharman Shanmugaratnam and a very enlightening and provocative keynote address by Dr. Jennifer Shuba, and a fabulous panel, which was moderated by Mr. Shai Ganu. So now to continue, we want to dive deep into some issues in particular. So the next panel discussion is called The Gender Pay Gap, How We Can Close It. So you can recognize that we're actually quite emphatic about that, right? So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our panelists. Miss Alicia Yee, Vice Chair, Global Consumer Market, Korn, Ferry. Miss Caecilia Chu, CEO of YouTrip. Mr. Jason Moo, CEO of Bank of Singapore. Ms. Hazlina Abdul Halim, President of Singapore Muslim Women's Association, PPIS, CEO of Make-A-Wish Foundation. The panel will be moderated by Mr. Philip Forrest, Independent Director.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My predecessor in this chair, my very good friend Shai Ganu, invited each member of the panel to introduce themselves. I'm a little bit less democratic than that, and a little bit more dictatorial, so that's not going to happen this time. But suffice it to say, how lucky am I to have such a fabulous panel. Alicia is Vice Chair of a Diversity, Equity and Inclusion practice for one of the world's biggest HR consulting groups, and previously was compensation practice leader for one of the other biggest HR consulting groups in the world. So incredibly well qualified to take on this question of the gender pay gap. Caecilia is breaking barriers and glass ceilings in the fintech space, and as a SGX listed director. Hazlina, henceforth known as Haz, chief Ferry godmother, it says on LinkedIn, and also CEO of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and supporting a host of other community organizations. And Jason, one of Singapore's leading bankers, and here to remind us that men are not always the enemy. I think what all five of us have in common is a belief in five things. The first is that us guys, Jason, me, us guys have had a pretty good run for about 200 years. And second, that women have had a pretty raw deal for about 200 years. Third, that we need to do something about that. Fourth, that talk is good, but the A in SAGE is about action. And fifth, a lot of the measures that we've been talking about this morning, and we'll talk about some more, a lot of the measures are moving in the right direction. And President Tharman said, you know, Singapore overall is doing well in this regard. And of course it is. But as he said, of course, there's still much to do. But okay, measures are moving in the right direction, but we're still entitled to be frustrated about the slow pace in some areas. For example, the percentage of women on SGX 100 companies, boards, in the last 5 years has moved from 15% to 23%. So that's not terrible. That's okay. But why do we only talk about the top 100 companies in Singapore? Why don't we talk about all the listed companies in Singapore? And maybe the answer is because the number's a lot more embarrassing if we do that. It's only 15%. So women on boards, we've still got work to do. And according to a study by Deloitte a few months ago, Singapore has the highest proportion of female CEOs in the world, or in the developed world, which is great. But it's still only 13%. 13% of CEOs in Singapore are females. So 13% is not a great number on the face of it, but having the highest proportion in the world does confirm something that I think we all know, that there is an incredible wealth of female talent here in Singapore. Sure, that deserves a round of applause. Now, another example. NUS advises that the gender pay gap in Singapore in the last 5 years has narrowed from about 16% to about 14%. Now, President Tarman mentioned a figure of 6%, and we'll talk a little bit about why they're different numbers. But really, the big question is whether it's 14 or 6 or anything else, why shouldn't it be 0? Why is there a gap at all? So, Alicia, if I can start with you. First of all, can you give us some clarity about those numbers, why people talk about different numbers? And a tougher question is, what is stopping us from closing the gender pay gap?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? So let's just start with a definition. When we talk about gender pay gap, what we're doing is we're taking the average or the median pay of all working women versus all working men, right? And that number globally is about 15%, and Singapore is quite close to the global average. And some countries are much higher, and some countries are lower. So that's what gender pay gap measures. So let me also kind of address one myth that we often talk about, that this is pay discrimination. And our studies have shown that it's actually two different things. So the gender pay gap is taking the average, but if you adjust for the levels of the organization and similar jobs, that number shrinks to about 5 to 6% globally, and Singapore is aligned to that as well. So meaning, if you're in a like-for-like jobs, women still get paid less, but not 15% less. We get paid about 5, 6% less, okay? But that's still a gap that shouldn't exist, as Philip mentioned. All right, so there are two different things. In most countries, gender discrimination is illegal. It's not necessarily in Singapore, but Singapore doesn't really have a serious problem with that. It exists, but it's not legal. So you can sue companies for it. But the gender pay gap exists when you look at the numbers is because women, there are a couple of things that are happening. Women are not moving up at the same fast rate as men to the more senior levels of organizations, right? So if you look at the data, even for Singapore, at the entry-level professionals, there are actually more women entering with college graduates. But it gets to the mid-management level, it flips 60-40%, 60% men. If you get to the executive level, it moves to 26% women, 74% men, right? So something is happening in the workforce where women start out stronger, but then they're not moving up to the senior levels of the organization. And that accounts for a huge part of the pay gap. Another thing that's happening is there is what we call occupational segregation, which is this kind of traditional norm of what women's jobs are, what male jobs are, right? So women tend to actually study softer subjects like psychology and sociology and things like that, and they go into teaching, they go into nursing, and all of that. And those are all low-paying jobs. Boys are studying more STEM subjects, and they're going into engineering and senior executive roles as they move up faster. So all those things are attributing to this pay gap phenomenon that's happening. It's moving towards the right direction, but if we stop talking about it, if we don't stop doing something about it, it won't automatically close. So I think what's important is really look at the data to see in your organization, what's stopping women from moving up? And what can we do about it? Because it's really the underlying cause that's really important than the data itself. I hope that helps.
That's terrific, Alicia. Thank you. Certainly, I personally have a much better understanding of the numbers now, so that's great. And you've outlined the problem. Where do we go from there? Other members of the House, you're reaching for your mic.
Yes, thank you, Philip. Well, thanks, Alicia, for setting the context to the number differences. I think a lot of us are exposed to so much data in trying to make sense of it. And I wanted to go back to what you said about occupational segregation, perhaps as a reason outlining what's stopping us from closing this gender gap. So systemic barriers remain. This morning, during the keynote, as well as during the president's address, he touched about some parts where the glasses were half full, and a lot of it was in workplaces. He talked about the half empty parts, and a lot of it surrounded narratives at home. I think the women's role, potential, and aspirations in the community, at home and in the workplace needs to be harmonized. I reflect about a very wise lawyer friend who told me, when you're teaching values, or who asked me rather, when you're teaching values to children, as parents, how many of you refuted the statutes of Singapore or the Constitution? Or the Penal Code? No, right? You refer to values, the core guiding principles that your family and your culture celebrates. So I think that's the root of it all, right? Addressing the gender pay gap is way, 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 way before reaching the front door of the office. That's my take.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jason.
So I was going to talk about the space that I'm in, and maybe that shed a little bit of light on this. And I thought it was funny. I was wondering why I was on this panel, besides being the token male. But in all honesty, the reason why I was wondering was because I'm in private banking. And in private banking, well, generally in banking, but definitely in private banking, if you think about it, there are kind of two career paths. One is the corporate ladder and the management, and that we can talk about that, about leaning in and promoting and making sure we have the right diversity at the senior management level. But on the other side is actually the private bankers, right? The relationship managers. And the reason why I was wondering why I was on this panel is because like half of my top producers in the private bank are female. And when we pay them on a commercial outcome. And when you pay on a commercial outcome, there is no gender bias. You just look at the number, you pay that person, whether it's a female or female, right? And we have currently, I mean, when I say half, about 55% of my top producer, we call it Pegasus Circle, are female, right? So again, I think it's also, we could talk about this whole management and climbing the corporate ladder, because that's another subject entirely, and we could talk about that. But I also think I would also encourage, I mean, especially in financial firms and banks, private banks, whatever it may be, if you measure people on a commercial outcome, I think that's the best way to kind of equalize that. And again, that doesn't prevent any male or female from becoming a top producer or a top commercial outcome, right? Because everyone should be paid on what they produce, and everyone should be compensated on what they bring in. So again, that's why I was wondering. I feel like there are less males getting paid better at the private bank than females. But in all honesty, I think they're the two paths that we should always consider when it comes to senior management or commercial.
Right. Okay. So in finance or in banking then, and certainly in private banking, there really isn't an issue. I mean, you can go home now, Jason.
No, we have not solved anything in any stretch of the imagination, because I still have a lot to do on the management path.
Yep.
But I'm just saying is just generally the principle should be, if you work for a company that has commercial obligations or commercial outcomes, then you compensate people based on that.
Yeah, and I guess our good sponsors from Property Guru would have that same situation. Yep.
Can I just have a follow-up comment on that? Because I think what Jason is saying, it makes two very good points. One, that women, given the opportunity, are just as good as men, if not better, right? If it's pure performance-based. And the fact that there are 55% of the highest producers are women proves that point. The other point is there are jobs like the one that you mentioned that where there is a transparency between pay and performance. And there are jobs where that's just harder to do, right? Because it's harder to measure. So one question we need to think about as an organization and society is how important is pay transparency? Because globally there's a movement, right? In the US as well as Europe. It's just starting to happen, but it's gonna come our way as well, which is for every job that you advertise now in the UK and the US, you have to disclose what the pay range that you're offering is, right? And then there's another law in the US, in certain countries like New York and California, where the hiring employer is not supposed to ask what you got paid before, right? Because what happens is if you are already in a low-paying group, then it keeps on perpetuating if the new offer is based on your old offer, right? So this whole pay transparency, it's really a thing. And in the UK now, if you are an employer that hire more than 250 employees, you need to disclose your gender gap, or so if you rank the highest paid to the lowest paid in your employee group, for every segment, every quartile, you're supposed to show the percentage, exactly what Jason did. Is it 55% women at the highest quartile paid versus the lowest? And you'll see, and so many companies are so confident that they don't have any gender bias, yet if you do the analysis, they're often surprised,
Yep.
right?
Okay, so is part of the solution to this to get laws imposed that enforce that transparency? Is that your...
Well, that's one aspect, because it's multifaceted, right? Because it's also cultural, it's also unconscious bias. Like, why aren't women moving up to leadership roles as fast as men? Is that because we have this traditional view of what a leader looks like, feels like, talks like, versus female or more inclusive? And when you do the analysis, I think you should also look at the ethnic groups as well. Are there any pay gaps or promotional gaps,
Sure.
right, between ethnic groups as well as gender? So the unconscious bias is unconscious because we are not aware of it, right? No company and no leader consciously say, I want to discriminate. You know, I want to pay women less, you know, That's not what's happening. And I know Jason really well because he's a good friend. He would never do that, right, Jason? No. So, and so we don't have bad leaders, we don't have bad companies with bad intentions, but it's happening because it's unconscious. It's happening because it's cultural, and it's happening because women are also not fighting for their worth, right? So it's multifaceted.
Okay, thank you. Caecilia, can I bring you in at this stage?
As a company, our core mission is really to innovate within the space of financials technology. And so to us, I would say having that diversity of gender, diversity of viewpoint and experience, actually to me, I see that as a secret sauce. And in our company, I'm truly honored to be working with a very broad bench of senior women leadership. Of course, you know, myself included, I'm one of the 2 co-founders of the business. And from a gender racial perspective, we actually have a 50-50 gender-balanced workforce across our offices. And to us, the key philosophy behind that was seeing is believing. Actions always speaks louder than words. So what we want is to have a whole suite of role models across different functions to really serve as an inspiration for women of all ages, whether you are 20 years old, fresh out of college, or 40 years old with 20 or so years of developer experience. We really want to inspire them to want to progress further in the career in the company. And also secondly, being in the financial technology space, building technology product. Actually, the industry itself, technology itself, is a great equalizer. Because as a user, when you think about, just now we were just having some conversations, with some of the audience here. We are talking about when we download an app, right? What we want to know is it really works. It works all the time, and there's no middle ground. It's either the app or the software that you interact with works or it doesn't work. So that really creates the level playing field for the creator, for the designer, for the developer behind the scene to create that product, making sure it works. And whether where you're from, gender, age, and all that stuff actually doesn't matter. And so, for us, we really embrace this belief that technology is a great equalizer to truly remind ourselves to build a very inclusive culture. And so far, achieving 50-50 gender balance in our space is no small feat, and it's something that we are incredibly proud of.
Yep. Thank you. Yep, well said. House.
Phil, if I may just add on to what Alicia said, and thank you, Caecilia, for walking the talk, really. Alicia touched on a couple of fronts that I feel companies and business leaders should really reflect on. I think the first was the understanding of the cultural lens beyond the gender lens and how it exists as an intersectional areas of focus, for example. There's a lot of data that shows different expectations culturally, which start at home, can also follow and shadow at the offices. I think that's the other kind of thought process to think about when you are employing somebody in the minority community. Beyond the commitment is the respect and understanding of the culture. That is something we truly have to embrace and honestly prioritize and be intentional. The other is about what's coming our way, the transparency wave that's coming our way. I think the footprints are already here. I'm starting to see, I think the government has come out to say that you can refuse if you do not want to share your last drawn salary. And on the government careers website, I do see advertisers already including the range. I think one challenge I'd like for businesses and women or even any business leaders to consider is how do you start with your own constituent, your own employers. How many of your employees actually know for sure fact what is their salary range and how are they progressing towards top of scale and what's the plan for them? I think that's another commitment. I know we get nervous about transparency because it can go either way. The National Council of Social Services publishes an annual guideline for the sector so that people can catch up and proudly say we are within the range as an employee value proposition. But in a corporate sector, it could be sort of like a bargaining power. I understand that. But what about your current employees? Do they know their range? Do they know how far away are they from your compa ratio? Are they in the lower third, upper third? I think these transparencies can begin at home, in your workplace.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Now we've sort of morphed into the area of what corporations can do to make this better. We've talked about transparency, for example. We've talked about mentoring kind of programs and role models and so forth. Caecilia, what else would you add? What should companies who have the right sentiments, they want to do the right thing, but they're not quite sure what else they should be doing to address this gender gap issue and make the world a better place?
So I'm, if I take a step back and look at the landscape of men and women being active in, say, technology or financial sector, I would say tremendous progress has truly been made, and I'm absolutely a beneficiary of many of the great efforts and great movements. But I'm also really excited about, the future, about the fact that I think there's so much more company can do. And, I'm really of the view that company, perhaps more than any other constitutions, can actually do a lot more. Because, number one, no two companies are ever truly the same. And there's so much nuances actually in the design of compensation or career roadmap. And I think, so sometimes, it makes the responsibility of the company even more, because some of these cross-country or cross-industry or cross-company kind of statistics, may not be the most effective way to really, bring up the understanding around the issues. And secondly, I think from a perspective of creating a meaningful career, there's so much more than pay that a company can consider. There are many company-specific considerations that are at play. For example, the kind of projects, the kind of opportunities that you give to a certain individuals, the kind of mentorship training that we talked about, the kind of career pathways that you can put someone on. And I think all these really contributes to, whether or not we can create a meaningful enough of a career for women or men to succeed in the space.
Okay, thank you. They're good points. Jason, please.
Can I just add on to that? I'm not saying I'm doing it any better than anybody else, but to just add on to what Caecilia said, I think it was also incumbent upon leaders at the top to also break stereotypes, right? So, for example, by the way, also want to say, my boss is a female, so the CEO of OCBC is Helen Wong, but when I say break stereotypes, so we were talking about a little earlier about the gender pay gap. We talked about how that was across the entire workforce, and because of that 15% pay gap, it was because we said that maybe males studied STEM a little bit more in universities relative to females, so females have gone into back office jobs or whatever it is, so it accounts for that difference. Well, my CIO is a female. My head of products who does all trading is female. My chief portfolio strategist who's developing a quantitative asset allocation model is female, right? I'm just trying to say that, like I said, I'm not doing it any better than anybody else, but these are stereotypes that have traditionally been held by men because, God, by the way, I'm the worst math person in the world, worst engineering person in the world, right? So, but, we need to constantly challenge them, that doesn't need to be held by traditionally a guy, right? It has to be challenged by a female. And by the way, I'm hoping she's listening at some point in time. But Helen leads the entire management committee, including myself, with great empathy, right? And that's her leadership style, but that's obviously something that's brought everybody a lot closer together, a lot closer unit. So I think it is incumbent upon people at the top, people who can make that decision, to challenge stereotypes and change them by putting females into senior management positions, and then showcasing to everybody like this can be done. Right?
Well said.
Now we know why Jason was invited to this panel. You're a great role model.
Haz, did you?
Sure. I think the core aspect of it all is for hiring managers, division leaders at the top to be intentional in building a representative workforce across the levels. We talked about how the adjusted pay gap is 6% when we take into account different levels, and that is key as well, because there are so many multifaceted factors that results in where a woman is in her decision making, including the ecosystem of support. I think the other one that, as the president of the Singapore Muslim Women Association, is to also highlight cultural considerations once again. If you look at data, the minority community in Singapore has really progressed over the last 10 years. Education-wise, number of graduates has improved tremendously. And for every one male in university from the minority Muslim community, there's 2 females in university. But when we ask for a reflection of the leadership data, it is not 1 in 2. And when we talk about minority communities, women from minority communities taking a pause from career building and exiting the workforce, that number is exponentially higher compared to non-minority communities. So these are information that we need to know, realize, and hope to change at the next stage when we meet, that these numbers must change. And when we do a poll, out of the 13% of women who are CEOs, fortunately 2 is on this panel, so well done us. You'd like to see more in the corporates, listed boards, and because in the social service space, a lot of head of agencies are female, and shout out to head of agencies of National Council as well as charities who are here. Well done to the EDs and the CEOs who are females. Take a bow, wave, many of you out there. And that must continue, but it cannot just be in one particular sector. So there has to be intentionality and commitment, right? Whether through role modeling, whether through male allyship. Jason takes a seat at the table, he pulls out 2 more chairs. Right, Jason? Yeah. So, 3 even. There you go. There you go.
Thanks, Haz. Thank you. While we're talking about corporates, what role is there, if any, and I'll throw this to you, Alicia, to begin with, for the associations or the trade association, the TACs, or is this an issue for each individual company to address by themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole ecosystem has to work towards it, right? So it's not a one solution part. But I want us to all reflect, because we're kind of cross sectors, we're an association with similar beliefs and wanting similar progress. If we stop for a second to think about the technologies that we're using now and its impact, we have to be cautious. But some companies that are more progressive are using it to create a more equal hiring decisions, equal promotional decisions. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is there are companies that are blinding CVs now. So you can't see the name and the gender, right? So you're making the selections based on pure experience. There are even some progressive companies like Apple for their customer service roles where they want to be super customer-centric. They don't allow CVs in the interview. And they use AI humanoids to screen the first round of interviews, right? And they're looking for that human skills, that customer orientation that they're looking for. So frankly, your education, your CV doesn't mean jack, right? So they are finding that they're finding better customer service people, but not using the CV, but using human android and AI to ask the right questions, and they read the responses and make hiring decisions based on that. And there are, of course, the promotional decisions that are much more human leadership-led. So we need more leaders like Jason that are pulling up more equal opportunities for all. But I just wanted to reflect
Yep, thank you for that.
that aspect and what some of the progressive companies are doing.
Okay. Thank you. Any other thoughts, though, on this question of associations taking the lead as opposed to, will that move us along more quickly than if we just leave it to each individual company to find their level?
I think associations have a part to play to encourage members to move towards uplifting women, whether it is a guideline, whether it is a lunch and learn from other companies, create a little bit of a competitive nature where you find out best practices. Like, I'm bowled over to hear how Apple has been hiring their customer service person. Makes perfect sense, right? It's all about interaction. So when you are exposed to others' practices, you can take on their best practices yourself. So I would say trade associations, memberships, definitely have a role on that front. And a commitment, of course, to learning, right? And exposure to communities and cultures that are not natural to the ones that you attract.
Yeah. Of course, we all know that SCWO and all its associated organizations are doing just this. But what I'm talking about are the chambers of commerce, the industry associations, and so forth. And my feeling is that there is an important role for them to be playing. Let's move on to another topic.
Sorry, Philip, can I just say, sorry, the banking industry doesn't have associations, But
It's
again,
the Association of Banks in Singapore.
yeah, ABS, but that's more of a support group. But in all honesty, I do think probably one of the best ways to ensure, and I hate to say this because I'd like to be the only player in the world in the field, in the ecosystem, is competition. Yeah. Right? When you have a competitive landscape, your talent gets bidded away. Whether they're male or female, doesn't matter. They get bidded away, they get paid more. You have to do the same. You have to pay them the fair wage. And in a very competitive landscape like banking, especially, it was funny. I was sitting in Philip's seat just now, and then he wanted to sit down, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, let me get up." He's like, "No, it's okay. It's musical chairs." I'm like, "Are you talking about the banking industry?" But in the banking industry where you do have people who move around, competition actually is the best normalizer of pay in any gender. So I hate to say this, but I would encourage competition. But I mean, it's hard to just say. It's easier said than done. But yeah, competition is important.
Yep, thank you. Look, could we move on to a slightly different topic now? I want to ask the question, what should women as individuals be doing on their own account to, again, to make the world a better and fairer place? I mean, is it as simple as refusing to say what pay they're getting in their current job when they're applying for a new one? What else can they be doing? Caecilia, would you like to?
Yeah, happy to start. I think, for me, it's really about having more conversations. And my personal observation has been that I think many of us are very comfortable to talk about our experience, what we have done, projects, things we put on our CV, but much less natural or much less comfortable to actually talk about compensation, talk about how that has evolved over the journey of our career. And I think more conversations bring more awareness and more transparency, more understanding around the issues. Also, don't make assumptions. Let's not make assumptions and just ask. And I think, women ourselves also has a big role to play in terms of, how to improve gender inequality, pay gap issues.
Yep, thank you. Alicia.
Yes, so I have a personal story that I want to share, which I'm not, but it's very much to this point. So when I was in my early 40s, I got my first really significant leadership role where I became the head partner of my office. So I became essentially the boss of my peers. And with that job came the compensation information of all of their partners and the employees in the office. And okay, so what I found is I was the lowest paid partner, and I became the head of the office, right? And guess what I did with that information? Absolutely nothing. So, like a typical woman, I said, well, if I use the information that I've been given as a leader, which I'm so lucky to have gotten, then given the opportunity, I can't possibly use that data to then ask for my pay raise, because I thought that was professionally, ethically not right. But, okay, in hindsight, I was an idiot. Because that clearly showed that I wasn't paid what I was worth, right? But I'll tell you what I did do to correct that. 2 years later, I left that company and joined a competitor. And I made sure that I had a competing bids, and I made sure that I got higher pay than anybody else I saw on my previous company. And I wasn't going to take a penny less.
Well done. Well done.
I'll add to Cecilia's point and Alicia's point earlier, and that is the question was, what can women do? So I would like to suggest to women to do two things. One is to tell yourself you are enough, and to tell another woman the same. I think a lot of us in the room, having had hiring experience, a lot of times you would find, anecdotally of course, that a male candidate applies for a role that's 70, 80%. A female candidate oftentimes waits until she's at 120 to 150 and is oftentimes way overqualified than what she imagines to be. And when you are in that position of making a difference and a change, right size the fit. Think of it as an opportunity to, if this candidate is the best candidate and if it is within your operating sustainability to adjust the role to a higher level, embrace it. Like, actually, perhaps you are more of an MD pay grade. See whether you move it up beyond the SVP, for example. So that's one way to sort of be the champion. I think the other really is to embrace this power of negotiation. Why are we so afraid to negotiate? Ask. No? Okay, I tried. I think the thick skinness, of thickening a little bit of the hide might be useful for us and women. And for our male allies, support women who dare to negotiate.
Fair enough. Yep. Jason.
I don't have much to add here. Waiting for everyone to come negotiate with me later on. Okay, very simply, I'll just say, for all the ladies out there and all the females who want to negotiate, don't start with why. Change that narrative. Start with why not. Yeah. Right? Why not me? Why am I not getting the pay? Why? Start. It's to Haz's point. A lot of times people are always asking themselves, why not? Why? It's like, why not? Why don't you justify to me why I can't be in this position, right? Turn that a little bit around. Unfortunately, I've told that to some of my guys, and now they're using it back on me. But that's fine, because I love being challenged, and I want to be able to articulate. Because if I can't articulate, then there's a problem, and I've got to go fix that. But start with why not, because that puts the onus of the responsibility of answering to the manager.
Yeah, great advice. So basically, we're saying demand what you're worth, right? One way or another.
But one of the, can I just add to that? Do we have time for that?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm super passionate about this topic. So knowing your worth is not just purely asking for more money, right? It's asking for that opportunity, asking for that risky assignment. It's really going for it. Because a lot of women, and I'm in executive search, so I negotiate a lot of packages for people. And it's absolutely true that female candidates don't ask for as much as male candidates do. We're also more self-aware, and we have a lot of other good qualities, but we're not a confident negotiator, and it has something to do with our sense of self-worth. But I think your sense of self-worth and your confidence will grow when you have the right experiences. And if you're missing the experiences, asking for it is not going to get it, right? So what you have to do is go for experiences that will make you valuable. Take more risks. Don't just put your head down and say, if I do this job really well, somebody will notice. That's just not the case, right? Somebody has to know. You have to know somebody who knows what you can do. So don't forget that. What that means is also that you have to network internally and externally. You can't underestimate the power of networking in order for you to get promoted, because when your promotion discussions is happening, you're not in the room. Even your boss may not be in the room. It's your boss's boss. So make sure you have a sponsor, make sure you have a mentor, make sure you have a coach, make sure you have the best team working for you, pulling you up, telling you what you need to learn. So own that career. Nobody should tell you how you should develop your career. That's your job. Own it and go for it. That's all I can say.
Fantastic advice. Thanks, Alicia. Isn't that great? We have a little bit of time for questions. Can I ask you, tell us your name and the organization that you're from. And if you don't mind, because we don't have much time, if you can keep the questions fairly pithy and as a question rather than as a comment, to give the panel the best opportunity to respond. So any questions? Thank you, yeah.
Is it on? Okay, great. I know you're not looking for comments, but I had to because Jason's my ex-boss, so I am testament of Jason walking the talk. So I have an answer to your question, Jason, and then a very quick question. Jason gave me the opportunity of a lifetime. I was 8 years in our previous lives in a previous American bank, and I was 8 years in a diversity role, which I loved, and I was heading it for the region. And I walked up to Jason one day, and we had been working together, and I said, Jason, I need a new opportunity. To your point, Alicia, I took the risk, I went to him, and a week later, I was in a non-producing role, and Jason offered me a role in private banking. I went from a non-producer to the producer, which was the first of its kind in the bank, at least in Asia Pacific. It was never been done before. So thank you, Jason, because from there, doors opened. And of course, he left after that, but... But you know, he laid the foundation, and you know, my path just completely changed. Otherwise, I think I would have just dropped out of the workforce. So I'm here to answer why you're on the panel. But to that point, I love all the comments. I love the comment about negotiation. I love the comment about risk taking. But I also feel in negotiation, if you transgress the gender stereotype, there's a bit of a backlash, which is what we're seeing now. So I think it's also important for organizations to still have policies and structures in place. So, you know, from your vantage point, just very quickly, what has been the most effective policy or accountability measure to get organizations to do more? Because obviously, whilst we change culture and we have Jason pulling up 3 chairs, we need things to move faster, and accountability and policy is important. What has been the most, or what do you think is one of the most effective measures? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the UK actually, since they have been requesting for the pay transparency, there's been progress. So Singapore is one country where we believe that what gets measured gets changed. And so I think if there is a disclosure requirement by companies to at least analyze their pay data and disclose it, I think that would be really, really helpful, because it just puts the emphasis. And the data may prove that you don't have any gender gap, in which case you can use it as your employment value proposition. You know, so many people would want to join you because you're so progressive. And so I think we start with companies doing voluntary audits of their pay to see where they're at. And, you know, if we can get that to be a regular practice, I think we'll make some good progress. Because I agree with you. Individuals fighting for their negotiation and pay increase, that has its limit. And depending on how you do it, it can backfire. Yeah.
I think to the point, accountability is also key, tagged to somebody's KPI. Always works, right? Put it as a target for everybody. So it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, a corporate target, a corporate KPI. And how does everybody play a role in doing that? And it need not just be management. It could be board as well. There's a commitment that the organization has taken to put forth. So that's one way. To make a difference, however, is really about setting a culture or a tone in the office that is welcoming to developing a fulfilling career and life. And with the new workforce, our wonderful Gen Z, Alpha, Schmalpha, I've lost count now, but around, I think you get what I mean. There is so much value to fulfillment, and it is not just at work. So how do workplaces design policies that will allow for such fulfillment? There's a lot of interest groups now I'm hearing in businesses. There's a lot of CSR or ESG commitments. So these are all intentionally corporates charities, organizations that hire people should have it as part of their EVP.
And there are some companies that are trying to actively bring back people who might have left the workforce to have kids. You know, how do you make it flexible? How do you make it work for them so they come back? So there are companies that are doing that. I think that could be another very positive thing. I mean, when you think about the childbearing ages and the PSLE, I mean, that's really a short period, right? I mean, it's intense, but it's a very short period when you think about a 40-year lifespan. That should not deter women from moving up and getting equal pay.
Fair enough. Thank you. Other questions? Please.
Hi, I'm Calissa. I'm here in a more personal capacity today, given some political sensitivities about my work. But in the spirit of healthy and constructive discussion, I just wanted to ask, what do you think young people can do in the early stages of their career, who are perhaps like Ms. Hazlina has aligned, well, Gen X or Gen Z or Gen Y or whatever Gen it is nowadays. And I'm also very heartened, right, by the fact that people in certain positions of power and influence are thinking about mentoring, allyship, sponsorship, from an intersectional point of view, from a male allyship point of view, by pulling more chairs to the table, by promoting positive role models in every single office. And lastly, for Ms. Alicia, I think you're brilliant, right? I can see how much you care about gender, closing that gender pay gap, closing that gender leadership gap. And in my own capacity, when I do startup advisory, I try to bring in more women board of directors. I try to bring in more women, female consultants, and basically get them to the stage where they can go to SID and become accredited directors. Because I want to and because I can. But at the same time, I'm only 25 years old. I used to be a lobbyist, and then I joined VC for a season as a sabbatical, and now I'm in government. And I want to make sure that government moves in the right direction. So from the digital industry Singapore side, especially for startups, for government policy, and for where IMDA is able to help, I'm definitely open to collaborating and giving feedback. And of course, from a Gen Z perspective, happy to share how you can retain more Gen Zs in your companies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, Jason.
First of all, you're probably one of the most articulate 25-year-olds I've ever heard. So congratulations. That's pretty amazing. But one thing I've started in my own firm, only for me, but I would suggest it just in general, is, you know, I don't understand Gen Z, Gen whatever that Gen number is.
That's skibidi, Jason.
Yeah, but
you gotta be Sigma.
But in all honesty, I have started reverse mentoring sessions. And I do think senior leaders need to understand their people across all age ranges. So if you're obviously a very smart, capable, and bold lady, suggest to senior leaders, maybe we start a reverse mentoring session, and can I help you learn about my generation and what we think about and how we think? Because that will be hugely helpful to them, because I know it was for me.
I think that's a terrific suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, I also
Caecilia.
love to chime in here for this question because, you know, at YouTrip we have a lot of, you know, younger workforce. And to me, you know, personally, I just believe that young people has a lot to bring onto the table. And for us, recruiting policy or philosophy is really to hire for potential as opposed to hire for experience. Because a lot of innovations and startup that, you know, things that we're doing, you know, we may not be able to find a truly relevant skill sets in someone's, you know, CV and so forth. So we really very much focus on potential. And if I could offer any advice to the younger people in the room, and also, you know, certainly within my office, and, you know, even to my young kids, is, you know, really think about the long term. So, you know, for me, when I grew up in my own career journey, I think career, pay, compensation, you know, really is about the long term, because the truth of the matter is the more senior you get, the bigger role you have in a company, your pay will always follow. So as opposed to, you know, thinking about what I get this year, what I get next year by changing a job, what I get, maybe 15, 20% more. Really think about, how to build the best career in 5 to 10 years horizon, because that would give you a very, very different outcome.
Thanks, Caecilia. Any other comments? I think we've got time for one more question, if there is one. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go giraffe style. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Lovely session. Deven Somaya, I'm with Citi. I loved a couple of points, I think, that scratched the surface. I think they talked about allyship. They talked about women not being ready or feeling that they're not ready. Men just thinking we're all... and by the way, I don't think it's 70%. We're ready at 30, 40% and we apply for jobs. Thank you. I'm also 25, maybe almost twice over. But my question is, male allyship is a very important topic. One thing that comes up in these job applications, post an outcome, and it gets under my skin, is, oh, she got it because of a DEI agenda. It really bothers me, and I'd love to hear from anyone on stage your views on how you tackle it. Because I think there are many men in the room, and I think there should be more as we go forward. And I think it'll be great for the allies in the room. And more generally, I think you talked about you and women helping women out. I think killing that message is very important. I think for us to collectively progress and correct the pay gap, the other discrimination, I think we've got to end it. I think there were times when I used to walk away from it, but I actually now get disturbed when these comments are made. So just love to hear from the panel what your thoughts are on how you tackle such issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we start with the head of okay, Haz, please.
Thanks for the question. I'll start by asking us to reflect when we try to hire somebody and we review hundreds of resumes and you shortlist the first batch for an interview. Some of you probably have a written assessment, etc. But at the point when you shortlist candidates for an interview, that is the point which you realize everyone that you are interviewing is actually qualified, right? An interview process is oftentimes not about qualification anymore. It's about fit, and it's about time and place, I suppose, or phase. So with that understanding in mind, then we can all confidently say that it is a merit-based process already. So there is no tokenism, or any female candidate should be made to feel as if, oh, I made it because of the DEI token. That's part one, right? Interview means fit. Everyone would have qualified. At least that's how typically hiring works. And then for the next step to that, for the female candidate, and I know a lot of feminine advocates out there would probably feel the same way as I do. Somebody says, oh, you get to sit at the table because somebody pulled up the chair for you. So what? So what? I'll sit in that chair, warm it up nice, bring it up for someone else and pull a couple of chairs, open a couple more tables. It takes a move. And to understand the intention of your doing that, I don't think that is something we should be embarrassed about. To be intentional, to be that person who dared to say, yeah, I pulled that chair. I had a choice to make pound pie, everything's the same. I chose this person because it is a female perspective that I valued and needed from my slate of leaders. I did that, I chose.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Alicia.
I just want to say, because I've been leading the D&I practice, and there has been a global swing from the Me Too movement, George Floyd, to now kind of a backlash around D&I, and now people are kind of weaponizing it. And to your point that sometimes when a female or ethnic female gets hired or promoted, then they say it's a D&I hire and D&I promotion. And I think that's a real major put down. And I would just say, if you've been following the US politics, Kamala Harris has also been coined as a D&I candidate. Okay, just objectively speaking, between the two candidates, who's more qualified, who's more coherent, who is more intelligent, right? So I think we absolutely cannot take that. If we are truly performance-based, we should be more gender balanced. To Jason's point, women are just as good, if not better, than performing well right? So why is that we only have 13% CEOs? Why is that we only have 26% women at the C-suite in Singapore? Singapore has the domestic support, family, multi-generational, fashionable support that should allow us flourish. And we should be an example. So I'm not going to take anything less than that. And don't let anyone say it's a D&I hire, because that's just
fair enough. When Barack Obama visited Singapore about 3 years ago, he said that if every country in the world appointed a woman as prime minister or president for 2 years, wars would stop, economies would boom, the world would be a better place. So I don't know if he's right or not, but what do you think?
Let's try and see.
Look, sadly, we're out of time. Can I ask very quickly for our fabulous panel, just 60 seconds or less on what's the most urgent thing to do now? What can we do now to address this whole pay issue? Alicia?
So I would say for all your companies, ask for kind of pay transparency. I think that's a one positive thing. Yep. And as a woman, go for it. Own your career.
Thank you.
To me, seeing is believing. So I really love to see many more senior women leadership across different industries, across different companies for Singapore.
Thanks, Caecilia. Jason.
So we talked about performance is okay. You were paid for performance, so that's okay. I think the management, we need to have a deeper pipeline. We need to promote more, and we need to make sure that senior management is well represented by women. So that's on me.
Thanks, Jason. Haz?
Identity and culture as well as gender is important and is a strength, so embrace it. And at the same time, commit to wanting to make a difference towards collective fulfillment. Build an office you want your children to work at and for, and run.
Thank you, Haz. You know, and my 60 seconds starts now. If we step back, Singapore is doing really well. I mean, with a global perspective, we can all be proud of everything that Singapore does, but in this space included. So congratulations to everybody who's associated with SCWO, because you're making wonderful progress. You're doing great stuff. The challenges will always be there, but it's terrific what you're doing, and personally, I'm very grateful to you, and all others who support this gender equality principle. Yeah, there's more work to be done. There always will be more work to be done, but you're doing a terrific job, and you're moving the needle every day. So well done. So that only remains for me to thank this wonderful panel. Thank you so much. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Missy, Ms. Chu, Mr. Moo, Ms. Hazlina, and Mr. Forrest. Again, I'd like to invite SCWO President Dr. Xiao Yan San to present a token of appreciation to all of you. Our next panel will be starting shortly.